Give everyone a minute as they filter in here. So welcome everyone. I'm Jenny Beeman. I'm the director of the UMass Stonewall Center, which is sponsoring tonight's event along with the space, the Asexual and Aromantic group at UMass Amherst. I will be introducing the speakers and then asking them several questions. After that, I'll open up to the audience to ask questions and make comments. Please use the Q&A function for questions and comments. It is such an honor to have leaders of the asexual movement from the UK, the US, and the UMass Amherst here tonight. We're joined by Yasmin Benoit. Yasmin works to dispel myths and stereotypes regarding asexuality and aromanticism and to promote the diversity of asexual and aromantic communities. She is one of the UK's most prominent lingerie and alternative models, through which she is challenging assumptions about how asexuals can be in the world. Yasmin created the hashtag, "This is what asexual looks like," in response to people telling her she did not, quote unquote, look asexual after she came out. Yasmin was the first openly asexual woman to appear on the cover of a UK magazine and helped start the first International Asexuality Day, which took place on April 6th. And will also take place, by the way, next year on April 6th. Julie Sondra Decker has been a prominent voice for the asexual community since 1998. She is the author of the book, The Invisible Orientation, which is the first mainstream published book on asexuality for a layperson. And she also spreads asexuality awareness through her popular YouTube videos, which you definitely got to check out, her blog essays and articles. Her interviews and reviews have appeared in print and digital media, on television, on radio podcasts, and in the 2011 documentary Asexual. So she is all over. We also have the leaders of the ACE and Aero student group at UMass Amherst joining us, which I am just so excited by. Leon is an MA student focusing on early modern Europe. It identifies as non-binary, gay, gray ace, and gray Aero. Its interests include classic literature, 80s music, and vampires. And last, but certainly not least, August is the linguistics and computer science undergrad with a fascination for interdisciplinary studies. And I would add an awesome staff person at the Stonewall Center. They're queer, non-binary, and asexual, but as they say, they're loose with labels. August spends most of their free time making art that explores intersections of trauma and asexuality. But in their words, they also like being up to no good on occasion. So welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled you all could be here. The first question that I have, I'm going to send Julie's way to get us started. And that is just to talk about your experience recognizing and being open about being asexual and what that was like.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Jenny. Growing up in the 90s when internet basically did not exist, you couldn't stumble on it through a Google search of why don't I like sex or something like that. So basically, many people that are my age, Generation X and earlier, have a similar story where they had to just kind of invent labels or feel very alone. I think I'm a little unusual in that I knew very strongly that I didn't want to do the things that other people were clamoring to do in my high school, but I was not particularly troubled by it. And that's a little different from most of the stories from people from my generation, especially, who felt like they were really alone and didn't know what was wrong with them, so to speak. But I mostly just rolled with it and just said, okay, I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested in that. I kind of used to think asexuality and aromanticism were kind of the same thing because it was all stuff I wasn't really interested in. So, I just called myself non-sexual. But for me, I wasn't interested in relationships of really any sort of traditional partnership types. And I definitely didn't want to have sex with anyone. So as I got older, I started writing, well, back then they didn't call them blogs, but website pages for my website. I'd write these rants where most of them were things like my roommate is annoying, or I hate when I run out of toilet paper or something. But in this case, I said, I hate when people say this is the top 10 things that I hate when people hear that I don't want to have sex and they say these things. And then I started to get mail and I found out, oh, there's other people who feel like this. So I just started writing more about it. And when YouTube became a thing, I started making videos about it so that there would be more information out there. And I learned a lot too. So that was really the beginning of my entrance into the community. It was developing kind of around me and with me as part of it. So that was my experience.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think I want to offer a sort of contrary coming out process where I knew about asexuality far, far, far before I ever identified as asexual. One of my good friends who may be here right now is Aroace, and she would talk about that a lot. So I think she was very much my defining understanding of what being asexual is, but she was very sex repulsed and generally sort of like Julia's describing, just very against it. And that sort of was contrary to my sort of view on sex, which was neutral and disinterested. And I guess that even though I knew about sex positive and sex neutral asexuals, I just didn't make that connection because the only person I knew who was asexual was sex negative and I'm not aromantic, so her aromantic experiences didn't really connect to me either. And then I guess at one point over quarantine, I just realized I can be asexual and not be sex repulsed. And that was, I guess, an important moment for me, is that I don't have to be the stereotypical depiction of someone who's asexual, or I don't have to be just like my friend to be asexual. I can be different and I can use different labels. I have a lot of different ace micro labels that I can use, but it would just take so long to rattle them off. And so after that, I think because I had been queer for so long, I had identified as trans and non-binary since middle school, and as some form of not heterosexual since elementary school. Coming out was easy. I was just like, hey, by the way, guys, I'm ace. And everyone was like, we knew. So that was it. It was not very climactic. And I think I'm unique in knowing a lot about asexuality through both the internet on places like Tumblr and through personal experiences before ever realizing I was ace. But it happened, and I'm so happy to be here. And thank you everyone for coming. On a related note,
Leon or Yasmin?
Well, for me, I guess I'm also was pretty much part of a internet generation to a degree, but it wasn't really something that was that central in my experience until later on. I knew I was asexual, as I always say, when other people realized that they weren't. So around early puberty, but I didn't have the language for it. I would just say, I'm not interested. anything. And it was probably also a manifestation of being aromantic, and maybe what everyone else was manifesting was their romantic orientation rather than their sexual orientation. But as always, it tended to blend together in the way these things came across. So I didn't make a distinction between them in the same way that Julie didn't. But it wasn't until I was 15 that someone suggested that I might be asexual. And that was someone who spent a lot of time on Tumblr, because that was very popular at that time. It was like 2009, 2010. And so I dipped into the internet, and I dipped onto YouTube and saw like, a bunch of YouTube videos about it, and hearing other people explain an experience that was strikingly similar to my own was what made me think, okay, so this is probably what I'm experiencing. But I still didn't really use the terminology that much, because the only reason I really felt the need to use a label was to articulate it to people so that they understood, but they didn't understand because they didn't know what asexuality was, and they didn't believe me when I said I was asexual. They were saying, no, you're not. So it wasn't helpful for me to say it, really. So it wasn't something that I was that obvious about, and people didn't. I kind of lived by like a don't ask, don't tell policy until like 4 years ago. And people only started to believe that I was asexual and accept it in around 2019. So when it was already printed in UK press, because people tend to believe what they read in the newspaper over what you tell them in your personal life. So yeah, that was kind of my experience with it.
Thank you. Leon?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for coming. I've never been on a panel before, and I'm very kind of like, oh my God, I'm here with these like ace celebrities. But I guess, so I have a similar experience to August in that like I grew up on the internet basically. And so actually the first time that I recall ever like coming across anything related to like asexuality or aromanticism online was like in 2010 when I was 11. And this was actually way before kind of ace community stuff exploded on Tumblr, but I did come across the word aromantic on Tumblr. And for some reason, it resonated with me, but for some reason I thought I was aromantic and bisexual, which like I'm not bisexual, but that was the first like queer label that I ever actually recall using. But I really quickly stopped because like, I don't know, it felt like, oh, that's not real, because there was nobody like, in the parts of the internet that I was in at the time, there was nobody talking about this. And so I was like, oh, that's cringe, like that's not real. So I kind of, closeted myself for a really long time. And when aphobia became really widespread on Tumblr, because this was all on Tumblr, it really like, did a number on my self-esteem, because I wasn't openly identifying as ace, and I didn't think I was, but like I was deeply in denial about it. And like I never related to people my age when they talked about like dating or sex or anything. The only thing was that I still do, get really, really intense like crushes and obsessions with like fictional characters and like historical figures. But in real life, I don't really think I've ever felt that, except for maybe once. But, because aphobia was so widespread on the internet, I kind of was like, oh, well, yeah, of course that's not real. Of course that's dumb or whatever. And it took me until I met some ace people online and like kind of became friends with them through other, through like shared interests, and went to college where I met ace people in real life and kind of started actually going to ace club. For me to be like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm not allo. Like whatever I am, I'm not allo. Since then, I've kind of, reevaluated some things again, because going on hormones has kind of, changed the way I feel about some things, but I still am absolutely not allo. And in terms of like being open, I don't tend to talk about it that much just because it doesn't really come up outside of like queer spaces. And it's a mixed bag when I do talk about it. So like in person, my experience has been pretty good when talking about it around other queer people. Around allo people, it's been not so good because most of the time people's first impulse is to be like, I don't believe you. And yeah, so that's been my experience with like that kind of thing.
Right. So let me ask another question, and I guess start with you, Leon. When we talk about asexuality, or really all sort of minoritized sexual and gender identities, the tendency is always to talk about how awful things are, discrimination, harassment people experience, and of course that's real, right? And I'd welcome you all to talk about what is difficult about being asexual because of what other people think or assume, but I would also really like to hear you talk about what do you love about being asexual? So again, I'll start this with Leon.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So like, I feel like one thing that I hear a lot of ace people say and that I agree with is that in some ways it does make your life simpler. Like, when I hear other people talk about their like dating drama or their sex lives, or I watch movies about it, I'm like, you really like, you live like this, and on, like when I relate to people, when I have friendships, I don't have to worry about like, what if this, I don't know, like all those kind of unsaid rules or games that people play with each other about like, oh, I'm talking to somebody, or oh, I'm going steady. I don't even know what that means. And it's just like, I'm just friends with people. The only people I'm dating are fictional. And that makes my real life much simpler. And also, at least in my experience, the online and offline ACE community and ARO community has been probably the best queer community I've ever been a part of. Like, I've hung out in trans spaces and other queer spaces, and they've been mostly good, but there has been a lot of kind of negatives, but I've never encountered any kind of gatekeeping or bullying around ACE communities or ARO communities, maybe because people are constantly trying to gatekeep those communities. And so to kind of compensate, people within that community tend to be like, listen, man, we're like, we don't care, just come in, just don't be mean, and like have some cake. Also the cake, like I like that meme and the garlic bread. So I think it has the best memes too. So yeah.
Emma in the chat said that your quote, "You live like this," is the quote of the evening, which I do agree with. That's a great quote. Someone else?
I mean, it's hard to tell what is, what's a good thing based on me being asexual, whether it's just like my personality, because like there are asexual people that probably do really worry about dating and relationships and sex, and they worry about that more than other people because they feel like there's something unusual about them. So I think my thing is just being asexual and accepting it, and being the kind of asexual person that doesn't seek romantic relationships and isn't seeking sexual relationships or encounters means that isn't something that I have to worry about. I'm sure there are people that aren't asexual that also don't have to worry about that, but for me, that is something that it's a stress that's taken off the table. And as someone that is, very content with their asexuality, I don't really worry much about that either. So it just takes one of life's problems off the table, I guess.
Julie or August?
Well, the thing that I think is really interesting about being an ACE person and an ARO person, we have had to, out of necessity, develop some language in our communities that allows us to talk about our experiences, because I think a lot of people who are straight and in some cases more established stripes of queer they already have these shortcuts. They have these pieces of language and this terminology that already exists and already means what it means. They didn't have to kind of create these things, which of course doesn't mean that they are not injecting creativity into how they use terminology, of course, but we actually sometimes get made fun of because of micro labels in the ACE community. Like it's a trope that we're just over analyzing everything. But we kind of have to be able to talk about our experiences, because some of us will say that person's really attractive, but we don't mean we're sexually attracted to them. So what do we mean? Is this aesthetic attraction? Is this romantic attraction? What is this? So I feel like one of the really cool things about being an ACE person is to be part of this discovery in communities that branch out from ours and intersect with ours, where we can shed light on aspects of attraction that maybe people have not thought about. I have definitely been part of conversations where someone realized maybe they were demisexual, which, if anyone who's watching doesn't know what demisexual is, it is a type of a spectrum identity where people may start to develop or can only develop sexual attraction under really specific circumstances, like other feelings, other positive feelings towards someone, then the sexual attraction may happen. And I've talked to people who thought that they were straight or thought that they were gay, and then they said, I think that maybe this modifier of my identity, maybe I'm a demisexual gay person because I never related to this other aspect. So the way that we've created these conversations in our communities has been so exciting to watch other people kind of intersect with us and learn more about their own attraction experiences. That's one of the coolest things for me.
I guess you get the last word here.
So that reminds me of something we were talking about in space, the UMass Asexual Aromantic discussion group, about how asexual people are way better at defining sexual attraction than any allo person, because it's something we have to think about so deeply. So I love how thoughtful we all are. And I guess for in terms of negative experiences, I feel like there's this weird, especially as an 18-year-old, a weird fear of missing out when it comes to sex. I'm so disinterested, I can't even describe how disinterested I am in sex, but seeing everyone around me just talk about this amazing and grand thing that they're doing with their partners, especially as someone who is in a relationship, always makes me wonder, am I missing out by being asexual? And it's a bit of an insecurity thing, but I feel like our community is so strong, and my relationship, which is non-sexual but romantic, is so amazing as it is, that despite my insecurities, I'm so happy. And also, yes, the cake is amazing. I feel like I can't state that one enough, and I feel like every ace person just wants to talk about the cake. Yeah, cake, Melinda. Anyway, that's what I have to say.
Fabulous. Okay, so the next question, Yasmin, it's your turn to be first. How can ACE Arrow communities, which tend to be predominantly white in the US, I assume that's also the case in the UK as well, how can they better support ACE people of color?
I mean, it's a big question. I mean, there's a simple answer, which is just don't be racist. But funnily enough, even the people that insist that they're not are actually not great at doing that. So I think that one of the more helpful things is educate yourself, which sounds super cheesy, but somehow even after 2020, where I was almost optimistic, thinking that we'd reached a pivotal moment where white people across any community, whether it's asexual, whether it's LGBTQ+, whether it's straight, whatever, had reached a point where they were yeah, we're going to read about this stuff. We're going to make sure that when the topic of racism comes up, we know what to say, we know how to act, we know the history, we know where these biases come from, we know where the stereotypes come from. People really didn't finish those books, so they have no idea. And I see it a lot in the asexual community. And I'm not so much the aromantic community, because I guess most of my interaction ends up being with the asexual community, but I definitely have and continue to experience racism from within it. And I think it's just important that in those situations, if someone says, oh, there is racism here, this is an experience I'm having, don't question it. Just take what they say, because they know more about it than you do. If they say something you've done is harmful, take it, learn about it, change that behavior, and try and be supportive. But make sure that that support isn't just performative, because hashtag BLM does not help. It doesn't mean anything. So you saying hashtag BLM doesn't help my life at all. It doesn't help anyone in the community actively doing something, actively saying like, okay, I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to amplify these voices. I'm going to host something. I'm going to challenge this idea. I'm going to try and expand that perspective. I'm going to incorporate this into my interpersonal relationships and into my work, and look at the diversity within the organizations I work with, or the content that I share, or all those things. That's more helpful than hashtagging. And making sure that your interpersonal relations line up with all of your hashtags and your Twitter bios also helps, because you often see people that they get the performative stuff spot on, but then when you actually talk to them and the topic really comes up and they have to actually do something, they falter because they didn't actually know what to do. They didn't actually do any learning, and they haven't challenged the biases, because they think that because they're a minority and because they are liberal or whatever, that they don't have any. But that is definitely not the case. You can be as guilty of it. And I think getting comfortable means that people don't challenge themselves as much as they would challenge someone about acephobia. I see people be very sensitive to pick up every tiniest nuance of acephobia that they could possibly find, but racism goes straight over their heads. It's like, keep that same energy. So those would be my suggestions.
Awesome. Other folks on the panel want to weigh in, like how racial privilege can be used to create space, make space?
I do have some thoughts. One of those is just that I've been in real life spaces and online spaces, and in real life like situations, it's much more diverse across every axis than the representation in mainstream media would have you believe. You see, including myself, white faces all the time, and I am 100% convinced that my white privilege did play a big part in why people come to me to say, hey, be the talking head on TV. I wrote a book, so that's something people want to talk to me about. But I feel like, they see me and then they're like, oh, we can relate to you. You're white, you're regular, so we're not as threatened by you, and that's it's damaging to only see one color of person on television and in these pieces and stuff. But in person, I've seen a big range of different races, also a lot more disability representation I've seen in person versus talking about it online. And so, I mean, since I can't offer any personal experience with racism, mostly what I would have to say about it is that during my research, I did talk to ACE and Aro people of color to discuss with me how that impacted them. And the thing that I think I heard the most was people talking about how it's a bigger risk to come out. If you're part of an already marginalized racial community, it's a bigger risk to come out as a sexual minority, because you're risking one or two of your communities. And sometimes you can't count on that support outside of your community. If you alienate your family or you alienate the people in your neighborhood, you might not have the freedom that people who say they're colorblind, or they say that they don't see race, that's absolutely that's ridiculous. So that's something that I have seen people talk about. And if you are a white person in the ACE spaces, I think that it's easy to just say, well, I haven't seen it, so it's not there. So we just, we have to listen to what everybody who can experience it is saying as to whether it's happening, how it's manifesting, and what we can do.
Yeah, and it influences another weird way, like that it influences coming out when I was listening to what Leon said about like the experience of finding other asexual people and being like, ah, I found like people, it's awesome. Like, yeah, I did not have, I didn't have that. Because you have the phenomenon being like, okay, I found people who use the word asexual, and it's 99% white Tumblr kids. So what does that, like, what does that mean for me? And then you go into the spaces, and most of them, I mean, I'm in the UK, so most of them are very white, or even online ones, they were also very white. So I didn't really get to be like, okay, cool, I can like totally relax and let my guard down. I'm going to be treated like everyone else. I blend right in. I finally fit. You have none of that phenomenon because you're still the odd one out in the room, and I'm still not treated the same. You just have one label in common and none of the others. So you don't really get that same like that same sense of comfort, especially when like, you know, racism exists in the asexual community as well. So it's, yeah, it definitely complicates the experience. It complicates navigating the community. And I can see other people in the chat saying like how it can be awkward, like, you know, navigating these spaces when they are really white, and you know, you still don't have that feeling of, yeah, I can just fit and relax here, because you can't, for the same reasons you couldn't everywhere else.
So I've been looking desperately for this article that I read while I was doing some sort of research for this panel. And it was about asexual people of color just sharing their experiences. And something that really stood out to me was how a lot of the Black asexual people struggled with this notion that people would just reject them being asexual because of the stereotype that Black people are totally like hypersexual. You know, how they're like always sexualized and reduced to objects in media. And something that really stood out to me as an unlikely sort of intersection, because I didn't consider that the way that Black people are treated hypersexually, and how that might affect being asexual, and how that's really damaging. And I'd love to find that article, and I'm looking right now, and it might be causing my computer to lag. But it was a really refreshing voice to hear all of these people. I believe there were some is it Latinx that you pronounce that? Latine? I still haven't figured out that word. Sorry. Voices. And I'm not sure who else, because it was a few weeks ago, but it was really enlightening just to hear those voices that I don't usually hear, because all of the AC people I know are white, other than maybe Yasmin, who I've just met. And I also think that's another thing to really think about for me personally, is how white this community has been in my experience, and how that's not okay.
Yeah, I mean, the topic of hypersexualization is something that I speak about all the time. So if you look up anything I've written, I definitely cover that experience. That was the reason why I couldn't come out for 10 years. It was the reason why I've been getting trolled for 2 weeks. And it's the reason why even some asexual people love to say that I'm not really asexual, not asexual enough to fit the standard. So it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, so I guess I'm last, but just jumping off of what's already been said about the experience of Black aces, it reminded me of a similar situation that I read about in Angela Chen's book Ace, which is, by the way, an excellent book. It has, I don't know, I read it recently and I was like mind blown. But so Angela Chen is an Asian American author, and she has a chapter in the book where she talks about like the intersectionality of racism and ACE experiences. And she talks about like one of the people that she talked with when she was writing the book was an Asian trans woman who also was ACE. And so this woman told Angela Chen about how like she had trouble accepting herself as ACE because she was already trans and Asian. And there was this stereotype that like, you know, Asian people are desexualized, which is like the opposite of what happens to Black aces. And so like this woman did not want to play into the stereotype. And so it kind of led to a lot of internalized aphobia on her part. But then, you know, by the time the book by the time she was being interviewed for the book, she had gotten over it, but this was like an experience that she told the author, which I found, really interesting how like it's kind of the opposite thing, but it's another example of how racist stereotypes intersect with asexuality and with aphobia. And I think, that's another important thing that white asexuals and aromantics should keep in mind. Like, our experience of coming out to ourselves is not the same as that of aces and arrows of color, basically. You're muted.
Yeah, I was about to say you're on mute. Jenny, if you click the mute in the microphone in the corner. In the left-hand corner. It's by the stop
Either
video.
audio is broken.
Is it? Well, maybe Hillary could pick up on the questions then, or we could just go through it. We have some of them. Hillary's here.
I am happy to pick up on questions. Are you talking about the preset ones or the ones in the Q&A?
The preset ones, unless we finish them.
No, there's one more, I'm pretty sure.
There's one more.
Yeah, there's
And I
one.
think August is starting us off.
Oh.
And that question is, how can non-asexual people help create a space for asexual and aromantic people?
So I guess the one thing, and this is a very, I guess, obvious answer, is just to listen to us. When we say that we exist and this is how we feel, and this is valid sexuality, allo people should just listen. I feel like a lot of asexual people experience like arguments, like people argue with them, like, no, you're not ace. That's not a real thing. That's what amoebas do or whatever. And I feel like if those people just listened, then I feel like a lot of asexual people would feel like they have a space, not just among other ace people, but also like in the world and in their like, communities, as like broadly speaking. So I think listening is very important. And I also think if allo people have power to put asexual and aromantic representation in media, like if you're a film director or a novelist or something like that, then just putting in asexual characters or aromantic characters and also consulting asexual and aromantic people on how to make those characters accurate and how to make them genuine. I think that would be great too, because we don't have any representation. I don't know of any. So I would just love to see that. And also to the chat, I know, right? Everyone thinks it's like you're a bacterium. I'm not a bacterium. I'm an August. Anyway, that's my rant.
I mean, I always just suggest like make a conscious effort to unpack your own understanding of sexuality and romance and why we're taught to value things in a particular way and why some things are higher on the hierarchy than someone else. And I think that if everyone was to just kind of take more time to analyze their own sexuality and their own romantic feelings or just their feelings in general, the different ways they can manifest, then I think that concepts like asexuality and aromanticism would not feel nearly as foreign and unusual. And then in turn, not only would that just benefit society in general, but it would also specifically benefit the asexual and aromantic community if people just, took more time to think about all the things that we end up thinking about because we have to unpack and dissect everything into tiny little pieces. And I think that other people, even though they often assume, well, I've got it all figured out because I've got like the word, no one's sexuality is the same. Even if you're two heterosexual women together, their sexuality, their arousal, their libido, their interests, their feelings, their desires, all of those things are not going to be the same. And I think everyone being made to think that everyone, you need to experience something in a very particular way, otherwise you're not doing it right. I don't think that benefits anyone. So yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Julie or Leon, do either of you have thoughts?
You want me to go next?
It's up to you if you would like to, sure.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that's the most important about creating spaces that we can be comfortable in is making them comfortable even if we aren't there. Like watching blanket statements about how you talk about sexuality. You're not just tiptoeing around it because someone ace or arrow is there, that you're kind of treating that person like, okay, we can't say this in front of that person, but we can talk without thinking about it when they're not here. So, and that to me sounds like kind of watching blanket statements that people make about sex, or, saying things like that everybody wants this, or this is a human desire or something, or the things that you often see where not being interested in sex is shown as an infantile state, or it's where virginity is shamed and associated with childishness. When you say those things, even if nobody there is described by that, you help to create a culture where that is a symbol of maturity, is sexual relationships. So if you don't have those relationships, or you don't have romantic relationships, then you don't have an adult life. And that is not true. I mean, I like to think I'm relatively mature despite the sparkly beret I'm wearing. It doesn't make me less mature. I'm 43 years old and I've earned my maturity, I hope. So I don't appreciate it when people talk about things that you might associate with an asexual person in a positive way, or an aromantic person in a positive way, becomes an insult for everyone else. And that's something that we can really, I think we can make every community friendlier to us if we watch that sort of thing. We don't want to feel like aliens. We don't want to feel like little children. We don't want to feel like you assume things about us. So, also some of us may be okay with discussing sex or discussing media that has sexual content. Some of us may not. It'll depend on the individual. So, if you treat all asexual people as if you can't mention sex in front of the children, it's very individual. So just not making assumptions about our sexual history, our sexual tolerance, what our relationships are like. Just doing a lot of the heavy work of educating yourself is always nice, but it's usually okay to ask if you can ask. If you want to talk to us about our personal preferences, just don't put us all in one box, and we'll make some progress.
Yeah, I guess what I would have to add to that, all of that is really, really good advice, everything that people have been saying here so far. What I have to add is kind of like something related to something that I've seen specifically in my experience with like gay community, is that like specifically in queer communities, people need to stop acting like sex is the root of homophobia, meaning that like acting like homophobia only exists because people have negative attitude towards gay sex specifically. Obviously, yes, it is stigmatized, but if that were the only thing that homophobes and transphobes and queerphobes didn't like, there would be no stigma against like gay relationships that didn't involve sex, or there wouldn't be any stigma against trans people. And, that's clearly not true. And this also, relates to aphobia. So like, I am gay and mostly ace and mostly aro, but I'm not like, that doesn't mean that I am less gay than, like allo gays. So when people act as if like the only thing that homophobes or queerphobes in general are against is like specifically gay sexual relationships. Number one, it leaves out trans people, but in the context of this panel, it completely leaves out gay ace people. Like I just want to tell those people, like, honey, you think it's easier being ace and gay than like it's not. And also people need to realize that being ace and aro is its own thing that comes with its own unique experience of the world. Like I'm not just a gay person who doesn't like sex, I'm ace and gay, like it's totally different. In fact, my asexuality has more of an impact on my daily life than me being gay. And like outside of queer communities, I think people in general should stop assuming or like stop treating asexuality or aromanticism like a disease or a tragedy. Like I'm trying to fix us. It's honestly great being ace and aro. The only thing that's bad about it is when people are like weird about it. Yes, or a hormone imbalance. I have had people tell me this, like I'm trans and I'm on testosterone. And I remember when I was just starting T, I asked a group chat for like other trans masks, like, what's been your experience? Like, is anybody else here asexual and on T? What's been your experience? Because I heard that it kind of raises your sex drive and like, how did that feel being ace? And somebody who was not ace, so was not being addressed in this question, replied to me like, oh, well, you'll probably get over that once you've been on T for long enough. And I'm like, did not ask, thank you. So yeah, it's not a disease, it's not a tragedy. It's just literally just another variation of the human experience. And I think once people realize that, everything else will come a lot more easily, when it comes to like acceptance.
Leon, I feel like you're here for all the best quotes in the whole world tonight. It's not a disease or a tragedy. It's just a variation of human experience. Beautifully put, beautifully put. I see in both in the chat and in the Q&A, a lot of discussion around relationships of various kinds, but between allosexual and asexual people, some discussion of have any of you ever been in a relationship with an allosexual person and what that was like. Some folks talking about having relationships and wanting some advice, being married and wanting some advice in an ace allo relationship, wanting some advice if you have any. And also with that, I think for some folks comes this idea of, or this feeling really of being invisible or having to defend your being a part of LGBTQIA+ communities. That's a whole lot of things to talk about. And I'm wondering if we could pick up there for a little bit.
Pick up with which one?
Anything that resonated with you.
Well, I'm aromantic and I haven't had any romantic relationships. So personally, I will skip those ones. If anyone else wants to take the relationship questions, then you guys can handle that.
I'm an aromantic person too, but I kind of found that out by other people trying to convince me not to be. All of my relationships were a very long time ago in the 1990s. They were not pleasant. I don't know that anything that I did would help anybody because it was mostly me having a lot of misconceptions as a teenager for what would make people leave me alone. And even though I did not have any sexual relationships with anyone I dated, I definitely had relationships with people that were trying to tell me, you don't know if you like it if you don't try it, like it's broccoli or something, which I love broccoli. Thank you. I'm in a relationship with broccoli on Facebook. But I'm not a romantic person, and I'm not interested in having any kind of not a queer platonic relationship, not a live-in roommate, not a business partner. Just I am happy being by myself. So I can't give like personal advice about romantic relationships, but being a person that has been in the ace community for a really long time, I of course have heard all of the horror stories kind of from both sides. And the major thing that I would like to say to people who are trying to make something work is that in a two-person relationship, you're each half of the couple. Neither one of you is the problem, including the ace person. You don't tell the ace person you need to become more sexual. It's that you're not compatible sexually. So if you can work out some kind of compromise, then that is fine. But you really need to get away from the idea that one of you in the relationship is the problem who needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, when you go to marriage counseling or any kind of mental health practitioners, there is a strong chance that someone will still see the ace person or the less sexual person in the relationship as the problem. And how can we make that person's sex drive higher, or how can we make them accept more sex? And that is a red flag. That is always a red flag. So you always need to, between yourselves in your relationship, whatever it is, however many people are in there, you need to have this idea that we need to be compromising rather than we need to convince one person to change to match usually the more common, the person with the more common desires, because that person will be reinforced by the status quo throughout just basically every area of life. They'll be told you deserve this, the other person is depriving you, they're at fault, and that is not true. So if you can't find counseling that will respect that both people in a two-person relationship or all people in relationships that are more, they're equally important, and your desires are important, even if your desire is to have no sex. So if it is true that this person needs sex as a deal and it's a deal breaker, and this person needs to not have sex and that's a deal breaker, it's better to break the deal than it is to insist that one person change. That's how I have heard it, if that helps.
I'm wondering if we can also talk, there's a couple of questions about not just romantic and sexual relationships, which is beautiful. So do either of you have comments on lovelessness or aplatonicism? And there were a couple more that I cannot find while I'm scrolling right now, but can we go to that topic? Yeah, what are your thoughts, feelings about different types of relationships or not?
So I feel like I could maybe respond to this. I'm not sure if what I would have to say would help, but so I've been in a total of one like non-friend relationship in my whole life. But it was with someone whom I'm still very close friends with them. But it was long distance, and we were both like, aspec. And we kind of considered each other boyfriends, but we were also kind of like, oh, it's queer platonic. Or like, oh, we're just like, one thing that we really liked doing was to compare ourselves to that thing in classic literature where, you have two guys who are like really close, and it's like, it's unclear, are they gay or are they really close friends? And it doesn't really matter. So I don't identify as like aplatonic or loveless, but I do have an experience of being in like a non-traditional kind of relationship that's not really a friend, not really romantic either. I feel like, there's a lot of different labels for that kind of relationship. There's, queer platonic. There's actually queer platonic is the only major one I can think of right now, but it's like, just like with any label for sexuality or like orientation, like if it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, you don't have to use it. And from what I've read of people, from what I've read by people who have been in queer platonic relationships, most of the things that they've said have been like, it's about what it means to you. And obviously that's true for any relationship, actually. Like, you know, if you want your queer platonic relationship to be like the same as a friendship, except you also, I don't know, buy a house together and raise kids together, it's totally fine. Or if you want your romantic relationship to be like, I don't know, you go to restaurants together, but you don't have sex. Or, you know, you could also have asexual but non-romantic relationship. That's also totally fine and valid. And if you want to come up with your own label for those things, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And I feel like there's this term relationship anarchy, which I really like. I feel like people, not just aspecs, but honestly, anybody could, it could, you know, it would be useful if people thought of their relationships in more anarchic terms and less kind of like, oh, are you supposed to do this with a boyfriend? Are you allowed to do this with a platonic friend? You know, is this gay or what? Like, is this straight? Am I making a move? Is this allowed? Like, just if it's consensual and if it makes both people happy, like, why not? You know, so that's what I have to say on that.
Any other thoughts on that one? Or Ingrid reminded us in the chat that we sort of forgot one piece that we were going to talk about.
I don't know what that one piece was, but I can see that there's 12 questions in the chat. So maybe we should just try and see what those ones are. Because I think we have like 3 minutes left, I think 4 minutes.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, so let's pivot back to that, but also addressing some of the questions that are still left. I am wondering what you all think or what your thoughts and perspectives are on ideas of visibility and also having an identity that's, quote, valid, whether that means having to defend it to other folks in LGBTQ plus communities. There's also a question, is there ever a way to know if you're completely certain on your perspective if you are asexual? So opening it up for a broader conversation about identity and visibility or invisibility.
So this is something, actually, Yasmin, do you want to go? Sorry.
I was just going to say something very quickly because that was a lot of questions. So my one thing would be visibility does not equal validity. Look at the trans community. They have loads of visibility and things still aren't going perfectly. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an increase in acceptance and everything's going to go perfectly well just because there's a character that looks like you on a TV show. Validity and whether you feel like you're valid and whether you feel like you're on the right path in life comes from within, not from other people's affirmation. So I think look inwards before you look for the media to reflect you back to yourself. Because if you don't like what's being reflected back to you either way, then it's not going to make a huge difference to you in the long run, in my opinion.
First of all, you might be noticing that I am 2 Augusts. That's because I have one computer that doesn't work and has a camera, and I have one computer that works and doesn't have a camera. So we're doing both. And I'd like to say that, so I'm non-binary and I don't present in the traditional non-binary fashion of being totally androgynous. I'm wearing a skirt right now and I'm wearing like a totally feminine outfit and I'm AFAB. So with that context, I would like to say that your validity as a person is not, it's not contingent on whether other people think you're valid or other people think that you're asexual or that you're aromantic or that you're non-binary or that you're trans or that you're gay or bisexual or pansexual. You're you, and the labels you use are your own, and that's perfectly fine. And the people who are saying, and there are so many people who will say so many toxic things about how you're not aro enough because you love romance like movies, or you're not asexual enough because you've watched porn, or because you're not a virgin, or you're not trans enough because you still wear skirts in your AFAB. And to that I say, like, so what? And that's what I've had to say, because otherwise I would hate myself, and I think a lot of people would hate themselves. So it's really about claiming your own language and your own identity for yourself and being proud and being confident. And that's a skill that takes a long time to really cultivate. And it's something that takes a lot of bravery. So that's my 2 cents is you're you, all of you are valid for whatever labels you use. And I stan you all.
That's wonderful, August. Thank you for that. I want to say something about certainty. We indeed do not know what tomorrow will hold. I really, really hate hearing people say, well, you'll change. I mean, people have been threatening me with, well, you'll change your mind when you're 30. You'll change your mind when you're 40. Now they're saying 50. I mean, are they ever going to shut up? The answer is no. And 40 is in my rear view, and I'm still not sad, and I still don't have a cat, so I'm not even a proper cat lady, you know. I'm allergic, actually. So, but regarding certainty, it's weird how certainty is demanded of people like us. I mean, pretty much of all queer people, but particularly of asexual people, because the idea is we are developing, we're some kind of embryonic state that has to go somewhere else. And it's never okay to stop where we are, as if we just haven't gone through any meaningful examination of our sexuality, when in fact most of us have thought about it a lot more than somebody who realized they were straight at puberty and then didn't really have to do a lot of thinking about it because what they saw around them matched. So for me, certainty is not really necessary, because I mean, it is technically an unscientific statement that I could say I know what I'm going to feel tomorrow, but everyone sexual orientation is a statement of a pattern. And a pattern for most of us is what was true yesterday and what is true today, and what you can reasonably expect to be true in the future. And that's what every straight person is saying. That's what every gay person is saying. This was a pattern in my life. Why should we be different? Why should we have to be more certain? Why should we have to come with some kind of guarantee, right? So if this has been true in our past and it's been true in our present, there's no reason that we have to be more certain about the future. But even if we have changed labels over time, even if it turns out we're fluid, this is still something useful in the moment that we are using. We don't have to go to the doctor and get diagnosed asexual. It's not a thing. So there's no reason that different and stricter anything should apply to us, right? So that's what I have to say about that. I hope that is helpful.
Yeah, I just want to jump in super quick. What you said about like being fluid and like it's not a diagnosis. Literally earlier today, I saw a TikTok by an ace person talking about how like basically they were saying, I figured out why people are so often reluctant to like identify as ace when they, say stuff like, oh, this sounds like me, but, and then they list something that they think disqualifies them. And the person making the TikTok was like, it's because of the word label. Like, it seems like such a kind of, like when you have a sticker and you don't know where to put it because you don't want to waste it or ruin it. Like, oh, I have a sticker that, like a laptop sticker, a bumper sticker, but it's like, if I put it there, that's so permanent. And if I take it off, I can never use it again. And what if I ruin the surface that I applied it to? And so their solution to this was like, think of it not as labels, but as a refrigerator magnet. You can put it, you can put it on, take it off. It's totally non-permanent. If you like a refrigerator magnet, stick it on that baby. If you don't like it, take it off. Or you don't have to have any magnets on your fridge, but if you like magnets, put them on and take them off as you please. And I thought that was funny, but also a really like insightful thing to say. So I just kind of wanted to jump in with that really quick.
Thanks for all that, y'all. I just want to do a really quick moment of transparent facilitation. It is my understanding that we're going until 1/2 the hour. Is that panelists? Is that also your understanding?
I don't actually know, but if that's what it says, then that is
All
fine.
that matters is that the person in the Zoom who I'm going to dinner with knows when it ends.
The Zoom, when you register, it says until in whatever time zone you are, 30 past the hour. Panelists, can I get like a thumbs up or something if you can stay for 24 more minutes?
I can do that, but I'm gonna go to the bathroom because it's 12 at night for me. So
Yeah.
this is like super late, but
Yeah,
I'll be back.
Can we
in a
keep going
second.
while you're in the bathroom? Is that okay? Awesome, cool. I just want to say I love all of the conversation that's happening in the chat. I love all of the things that are being brought up in the Q&A. I feel like we're having a million conversations at one time, which is beautiful. And there's so much to dive into here. So we will send this recording, the YouTube link out to everyone after. And we will also include the chat transcript so that you can go back and sort of look through all of the amazing things people are talking about. And I know I'm lumping lots of things together and throwing like 10 questions at you at once and just seeing what sticks. And for the sake of time, I'm going to keep doing that a little bit. I would love for us to pivot to this idea of community building in a variety of contexts. So Ingrid is talking about being from a mid-sized town in Brazil and having the asexual community not quite be community yet. So how do we build a local community from the ground up? There's a number of folks talking about, and by a number, I mean like 2, sorry, 2 or 3, building community on a college campus, whether that is at UMass or at another college. And that includes like how do you reach people that may not even think of themselves as any sort of queer or ace yet? In part of that community building, and community building for young folks, younger than college. So like high school, middle school, any thoughts or advice on that?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry, Julie, were you gonna go?
Oh, I was mostly going to say that I don't do a lot of that. It's not my scene really. I'm more of a content creator, so I mostly leave that to people who do like to organize in person. And you know, I'm more comfortable with creating content for those people to use.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Julie. That's beautiful. I'll jump in, looping one more. And someone is asking about online community and also the pros and cons of that. And I think content creation could totally be a part of community building. If you want to say anything else or not.
I'm less of a community person. I mean, I'm in them and kind of show up in them, but it's less about interaction for me. Even though I like individual people, I'm less of a people person, more of a individual I like you person. So I think that I'm less of an organizer when it comes to herding cats. You know what I mean? So, and they didn't really have ACE community type stuff when I was in college. So I don't know very much about that. But some of y'all are college people. So I want to hear from y'all what you're doing.
I'd actually like to jump in because this is finally my area of expertise. So as a part of my my job at the Stonewall Center, I direct a lot of the activities surrounding ACE people. And Jenny can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is, or Jenny or Hillary, but I believe we didn't usually have those in the past. I think the fact that we're doing this panel is new, and I think the fact that we just had a asexual Halloween party is also new. And I might be wrong because I'm a freshman, and I got into all of this very accidentally. Anyway, I think a lot of it, as an event planner, is just asking other ace people what they want to see. And then yes, the asexual Halloween party was very fun. It's asking ace people what they want to see. Do they want to have an event that talks about like education? Do they want to talk about their experiences and vent a bit? Or do they want to have fun? What is the needs of your community at this point in time? And so I talked to the people at Space, which is our asexual club. I believe you can, if you're at a campus, if you're at a university, you could probably see about gathering interest for something like that on your own. I imagine the process differs per university, and the need for such a thing would also differ based upon what university you're in. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But the point is that gathering a community, first of all, by asking around, sending emails to people you know, talking to your queer spaces on campus if you have those, and seeing if they have any ace people who are interested in making some sort of community, and then finding the needs of that community, and then just going for it. So that's what I've been doing. Is our Space community wanted to have a Halloween party. I believe it was Leon's idea. I don't remember all the details. And then I was like, sure, Jenny, let's do this. And then Jenny was like, yeah, let's do this. So my position as someone who has a job doing this has definitely given me a lot of leeway. But I think it's also possible to organize these kinds of things, albeit more difficulty, on a more grassroots level. And then educational events can also just literally be like put posters around. You and a bunch of other ace people can just do that. So there's a lot of things you can do to create community on a college campus or anywhere else. And I think the first step is to just talk to people. And that's my rant.
And Leon, were you going to say something at the very beginning about this topic?
I kind of was, but honestly, August articulated it much better than I could, because August has been an amazing organizer for Ace Club. Like, I'm just kind of hanging on, sort of, doing my little thing, but I'm very busy with grad school, but August is also very busy with their job and their college stuff. So I'm honestly in awe of everything that they've been doing for Ace Club. So yes, I have nothing to add pretty much at this point.
Great. And Yasmin, just in case you have anything to add, I asked a whole bunch of questions about community, but in short, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for building Ace and Arrow communities, either online or in person, either in like small towns in Brazil, in a high school, or at a college level?
No, I think you guys probably know a lot more about that than I do. I don't really get to just casually interact in Ace spaces online or offline. It tends to be, people tend to treat me differently, so I can't just kind of show up and join the party like that. So I'm probably not the best person to give advice on how to do that kind of thing. But I think everyone else covered it really.
Great. The next big topic that I'm just going to throw a couple of questions at you from, and feel free to speak to anything that sort of resonates with you. If anything, are recommendations or advice that you have for people who, from the questions, I'm assuming are not Ace or Arrow, but advice for therapists, professors, people designing sex ed curriculum, etc. And a specific ask around, if you could add or change anything about sex ed, what would it be? Yes.
I mean, I guess it depends on where you are in the world. I know that asexuality isn't included on the UK's curriculum, but I mean, I think it should be. I think just including asexuality in general, or going just even more deeply into different sexualities and sexual identities and the different ways you can experience sexuality and romantic relationships and consent and the nuances, I think would be helpful in sex education in general. And I think that sex education in most places isn't really go very deep into any of those topics, whether it's particularly not asexuality, but I don't think it's great at any of the other sexualities either. I think sex education has been in need for a bit of a reform in most places for a while. So that is something that, I mean, I've worked with people that handle sex education for young people, especially when it comes to LGBTQIA plus things. And there's a reason why specific organizations need to be the ones tackling it, because the actual education system and the government run curriculum doesn't do it. But obviously consulting actual people who are part of those communities first is recommended. So you make sure that you're articulating things the right way and covering the things that people actually think are important.
Anyone else thoughts on sex ed or advice for other professionals, therapists, professors?
I don't have a lot to say on sex ed specifically, because I was homeschooled when I would have been getting sex ed classes in school. So I don't know what sex ed is like. Also because it's very different across all the states. So I'm from Massachusetts, and I imagine, or I like to think, that it's maybe better here than it is in some other states where there's a lot more work to be done, not just around asexuality, but just like sex ed in general. I want to note that I was homeschooled not because my family is we're not like fundamentalists or anything. It was just for personal reasons. But I think when it comes to professionals, so I've had experiences with therapists, I don't remember if I have talked very much about being ace with therapists, but I've definitely brought it up occasionally. And I have not had totally positive experiences with that, because a lot of the time, people tend to assume, if you're going to a therapist, you already have something wrong with you. You're already depressed. And well, surely that's why you're not into sex, because you are depressed, or because you are anxious, or because, I don't know, you have OCD and so you're afraid of germs. It's yes, I am afraid of germs, but that's not why I'm ace. So I just think, what I said earlier, if people would just realize that it's not a disease or anything like that, that would already be a really big step. Because if you just see it as anything else that's totally normal, you're not gonna approach your patients or your clients or your students with a kind of judgmental perspective.
I just want to add that I think if you're a therapist or any kind of worker along that lines, and you know what asexuality is, and you're coming to this, you're already doing a lot better job than most people out there. I think really at this point, the fact that all I could be begging for and be thankful for is acknowledgement is really telling about how completely unaware of our existence people tend to be. And I want to echo Leon's point about not conflating asexuality as a symptom of mental illness, because I'm someone with PTSD. And I think, the moment you hear someone with PTSD due to childhood trauma and asexuality, you're going to want to assume that those two things are linked. And I guess this is to a point about someone, I believe in the Q&A, was asking about how of the intersection between asexuality and trauma. And I think the fact that I've had to spend a lot of time deciding or thinking about how my asexuality and my trauma are two different parts of my identity that happen to be tangled up together, was just so important and so like and it's something my therapist never prepared me for because she doesn't really know much about asexuality. And I think a lot of people would have told me that your asexuality is because you're traumatized, when in reality I'm just genuinely disinterested. So yes. Oh, Leon, that's such a good point. Yes. So yes, thank you. I feel like I could ramble on about this, but I must restrain myself. Otherwise, I'll start talking about novels and horror and all these things that I just have so many opinions on.
Well, I could say one thing about sex education. I remember that this was a while back, but asexualoutreach.org in Toronto was developing a sex ed curriculum that can be put in high schools. And I believe it's still on their website. If you go there and look at their projects, I think they still have a link to it with downloadable stuff. So that's pretty cool. Regarding the question about therapists, this may have limited usefulness, but if anybody didn't already know this, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, I think it's called, the DSM-5, is asexual inclusive sort of to a point. It mentions an exception for asexuality in, I think, the 2 different types of sexual aversion disorders. They'll say, you might have this, but if you identify as asexual, then you don't. Like, it at least acknowledges our existence, although in kind of a problematic way. Like, you have to already know that you're asexual and say that before it even would qualify you. And so it's still kind of messed up. But if your mental health practitioner or your therapist or whatever actually wants to look up what that is and look up some of the documentation that led to asexuality being included as like an exception to mental disorders, they may be able to learn something if they're actually invested in doing that. Because unfortunately, I have heard a lot of stories about straight up medical abuse of asexual people that they unknowingly even participate in somewhat willingly because they think what they have is low libido. And so they're going to prescribe actual medical intervention, sometimes to a completely inappropriate degree, just because they think this is the only way to not have something wrong with you. And we all get these messages just in every aspect of our lives. If we think that we need to be sexual to be healthy, then sometimes we'll do anything, especially since, again, that's part of the status quo. That's what everybody's telling us, that you can't be both asexual and or aromantic and be a healthy person. So, and again, like some of the others here have said, those things will get tied together with other disorders that you may or may not have, or other things that you're trying to work through. They'll always kind of assume that if the asexuality is not cured, then you're not cured yet. It's just such a bad way of looking at it. So that's what I have to say on that.
Yeah, the qualifier in the DSM does not translate over here. Our ICD, which is our version, the International Classification of Diseases, still pretty much has asexuality pretty much qualified as a mental disorder, and conversion therapy rates for asexual people are disproportionately high in the UK. And I've been involved in campaigns related to that. And I know asexual people that have been incorrectly medicalized and given drugs that they don't need in a bid to cure them of their asexuality. So that is definitely still an issue, and we haven't got as far as the US has in that regard over here.
The bar is low, isn't it?
It's probably the one medical thing that you guys do better, to be honest.
All right. In the interest of time, we've only got about 5 minutes left. I am wondering, and panelists, tell me if you're on board for this idea, and if you're not, that's great. If we might just wrap up by you all sharing like what are the one or two things that you want people to walk away from from this panel. Does that feel like an okay way to end, or would you prefer to end a different way? Cool. Excellent. Let's end that way. And before we do that, just a highlight, I just dropped a link for a contact sheet in the chat and also in the answers to the questions. Feel free to fill that out if you want. We'll include it when we send stuff out. I'm also I'm a horrible multitasker, but I'm about to drop in a resource document so you can put in your different resources. And we'll also go through the chat transcript because you all already shared so many. So we'll also go through and add those to the resource doc before we send it out. Cool. Who can get us started with sort of a checkout? What do you want folks to leave with?
I think I will defer to the more seasoned ACE activists here, so I'll go later.
I guess I'm the oldest one, so I can go first. But you know, there's a lot of people in the chat that I've been just kind of glancing at, people who are so delighted to find out that each other exist or each other have had similar experiences. Some of y'all are bouncing off of stuff that we have said, saying what a great point, or I never heard that before. It's really amazing to know like how many people out there have probably felt like I'm the only person who's felt this, or I'm the only person who's been through this. But if you are feeling like you really want to talk to people in the ACE community, I would say like whatever social media that you like, if you like any social media, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you want to join some kind of forum like Avon or like any of the Discords that are out there. I think I saw one just come up. Find people where you already are. And this also goes for non-ACE people that want to understand us. Watch what we talk about. And those of you who have the same experience as us, you will see mirrors. You will see people who have felt what you feel, who may or may not have advice, may just be able to commiserate or may be able to celebrate the joy that you have in your orientation. And if you want to learn more about our issues, I would suggest doing, more listening than contributing. If you're not on the spectrum of asexuality or aromanticism, but you want to understand it, watching what we talk about is very, very helpful in understanding like what we deal with and how we talk to each other. It's much more effective than reading a book about us, although I have one if you want to read it. But I think that authentic interaction with our community is what really helps you understand. I hear so many stories where people say, oh, I didn't believe in this until my daughter came out or my best friend came out. And then that changes things for them. So I think that will be very helpful for you to develop an authentic understanding, whether you're part of the community or you're not.
I wanted to sort of touch on the fact that every single asexual and aromantic person here is valid, and your asexual and aromantic identity is real, regardless of whether you're completely passing as a normal, whatever that is, heterosexual person, or if you're the most asexual, like, you got the flag everywhere and you tell everyone about it, or anything in between. You're valid if your identity is transient and you discover that you're something else. You're valid if you figure it out when you're 50 or when you're 12. And I just want to let people know that, because I think people say that a lot to, other queer identities, about trans people, about gay people, but we don't hear that much because we're so small and sometimes disconnected from each other. And on that note, I just want to say that you all have the agency to create a sexual community where you live, and be that in an online space that you live in or in a real space that you live in. And especially for those of you who are on college campuses, there's so much opportunity to do stuff there. I'm very lucky that Jenny and Hillary and Crystal decided to hire me so that I could make such an impact on our community here. But really, something that I should have realized a long time ago is that I could have just talked to other ACE people and done stuff myself. And that's something you guys can do. And I also want to highlight what Justin said, is that all of you are amazing for staying true to yourselves in the middle of a deeply heteronormative and cis normative world. And I think that's just what I want you all to know, is that we're doing great, and we're such a vibrant community that I feel like things will only get better from here. Thank you for attending. It means a lot to me as someone who helped organize this and spent a lot of my working hours on it.
I guess for me, I would just surmise some of the points I've made, which is that I think first and foremost, acceptance needs to come from within. Don't place so much emphasis or reliance on affirmation from strangers on the internet or from media organizations. You're valid and you're real no matter what they say, and you will not really be able to feel comfortable within yourself until you accept yourself, regardless of what other people say. And if you can carry yourself with confidence and own who you are, then other people will react to you differently. And even if they react to you badly, it will not make nearly as much of a difference. So focus on building yourself first. And I guess another sentiment, it's not necessarily the most positive one, but again, asexual people can be racist too. Don't forget to keep checking yourselves, because it could make a lot of my experiences and the experiences of, probably considering how many people of color there are in the world, I think we almost outweigh the white population of the world. So there's probably more of us. It could make our experiences a lot easier. So that would be my closing statements. And thank you for having me, and thank you all for your support.
Great, and I guess so. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who came to our panel. Thank you to everybody who helped organize it. Thank you to all the panelists. This has been really, really awesome to be a part of. And I guess my kind of closing sentiments would be, first of all, to just say yes to all that everybody else has already said. And also, like, to people who might be listening and are thinking if maybe they are ace or aro, or just questioning their identity in general, like, if anything that we've said today has resonated with you and you feel like you want to, be a part of the ACE community, you can absolutely do that, because I think, it's a really welcoming community for the most part. Obviously it has its flaws, but I think in terms of like gatekeeping labels, it's at the very least good at not doing that. As opposed to some of my experiences in other communities, I feel like in the ACE and ARO communities, there's a lot less discourse about like, are you really ACE if this or if that? Because most of the time people are like, hey man, I'm not the boss of you. I can't tell you. But also don't feel like you have to know exactly who you are, like, and then you have to stick with it. Like, like I said, it's a fridge magnet, not a label. Well, I didn't come up with that, but like me personally, I went for a long time not really knowing what the heck was going on with me. Then I kind of really leaned into being ace. Then after that, I was like, oh, gee, I don't really know. And at this point, I'm like, well, I certainly don't really get what allosexuals are talking about most of the time. So if anything, that should be an indicator that, I'm not whatever it is they are. And like, that's good enough for me. I feel like being around people that you feel supported by is much more important than what you specifically call yourself. So if that helps anybody, those are my closing statements.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Jenny and Leon and August for all of your work putting this together. Thank you to Julie and Yasmin for being here, and Yasmin, because it's 12:30 in the morning or something where you are. Thank you for staying up for us and starting so late for us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, everyone, and look for an email from us relatively soon-ish, probably by the end of the week or early next week, I would say. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.